Tonight at 10, the number of dead in Italy's earthquake now stands at 281. A state of emergency has been declared. 3 of the victims are British. Marcus Burnett, who was 14, and Will and Maria Henneke Gottlieb, both in their 50s. They all died in the same collapsed building.
There was nothing we could do with our bare hands. They were sleeping in a room on the ground floor, and it all collapsed on them.
As time passes with so much devastation, the authorities say hope is fading of finding anyone else alive. We'll never be able to dry our tears, says Italy's Prime Minister. We'll be live in one of the worst affected areas. Also tonight, thousands of people are allowed to leave the Syrian town of Daraya after one of the most brutal and long-running sieges of the war. A bomb disposal team is sent to a neighborhood in Birmingham after 5 people are arrested on terror offenses. The drug addicts and dealers in the Philippines who are happy to turn themselves in to avoid death squads in the war on drugs. And West Ham's newest player signing, who will never set foot on the pitch.
In the south, a plan to persuade tourists away from London as 5 million Brits opt for a staycation this weekend. And 90,000 people arrive in Reading for the 45th annual festival.
Good evening. 3 Britons are among the dead of Wednesday's earthquake in central Italy. Marcus Burnett, who was 14, was on holiday with his parents and sister, who all survived, while Will Henneke Gottlieb and his wife Maria, both in their 50s, also died. Today, the Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi said his country will never be able to dry its tears, and he's promised £42 million to help rebuild the worst affected areas. The current death toll stands at 281. Our correspondent James Reynolds has sent us this report.
This is the road to the village of Somati. 2 British families, the Henneke Gottliebs and the Burnetts, were on holiday here. They'd come for a summer festival. This is the house in which both British families were staying. And you can see that the damage is dramatic. And both families have paid tribute to the work of those relief workers who tried to save everyone here. Their neighbour, Nando Bonani, was the first to reach them.
I shouted and called out for Maria and Will, but I didn't hear any reply. There was nothing we could do with our bare hands. They were sleeping in a room on the ground floor, and it all collapsed on them.
The Burnett family from London lost their 14-year-old son, Marcos. His school calls him a much-loved and admired boy. 50-year-old Maria Henneke Gottlieb and her 55-year-old husband, Will, also died. They were from Stockwell in South London. Many survivors are left with a simple, powerful question. Why did so many buildings fall and so many people die? The small town of Ascoli Piceno has counted its dead. It's laid out 34 coffins in a gym. The smaller boxes show you how short some of these lives were. These 2 coffins contain the bodies of 2 little girls, Marison and Giulia. Italy also mourns married couple Fabrizio Trabalza and Paola Rascelli. They'd come to this region on holiday. Underneath the rubble, rescuers found their bodies in an embrace. 11-month-old Elena Sofia has no idea that she too was nearly killed. She and her mother Sonia are recovering in hospital.
I
was buried in rubble, only my face wasn't covered. I could hear my baby crying. I was terrified. I freed myself and started asking for help, but everyone was in the same situation. So I went back and with my hands I freed my daughter from the rubble. I could only see her little foot and I just pulled her out. She wasn't crying anymore.
The worst-hit town, Amatrice, will soon begin to hold funerals for its victims. But its cemetery has been damaged. This town and others will have to find new ground in which to bury their dead. James Reynolds, BBC News, Somati.
Well, Italy has now declared a state of emergency in the worst affected areas after the quake. As the search for survivors continues, more than 1,000 aftershocks have hit the region since Wednesday, and the authorities are now saying hopes are fading of finding anyone else alive in the rubble. Here's our Europe correspondent, Damian Grammaticus.
Back and forth they went today, teams heading out into the mountains. The task now was to search villages and hamlets no specialist rescuers had yet managed to reach. More than 30 new locations spread out across the earthquake zone.
In our experience, you can also find alive people after 48 hours or 50 hours, so we are still looking for alive people.
You think it's still possible to find?
Yeah, it is.
It's a little more than 48 hours.
Yeah, but we hope it's still possible.
And that means 5,000 rescuers are still hard at work, around the clock. And this is the task the rescue teams face, to comb through every pile of rubble like this in every single village in this area, because each one of these used to be somebody's home, and there could, even now, still be people alive underneath here. Here in the Apennine Mountains, towns perch precariously on hilltops. The toll here in Amatrice is now more than 200 dead, and dozens perished in other villages too.
Qui in questa zona, da questa parte fino a qui, nessuna.
Romeo De Angelis showed me where 6 or 7 of his neighbours died. He managed to scramble to safety as the masonry crumbled around him.
In questo paese qui.
The houses over there, they're all destroyed. But even if you go inside the houses that look okay, they're actually full of cracks.
So Romeo, along with more than 2,000 other survivors, are now living like this, camping out in shelters. Where they'll go, where they can now live, nobody knows. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Amatrice.
Well, let's talk now to James Reynolds. He's in one of the worst affected areas. And James, one gets the impression that as the hours pass by, this is becoming more of a search and recovery operation with less emphasis on the rescue.
That's right, because the sound of constant digging here in Amatrice has stopped. No digging probably means no hope of finding survivors. But there's still an extensive relief operation in this area. My colleagues and I spent several hours driving around this region, and in almost every small road and every small hamlet we saw soldiers, we saw firefighters trying to secure the access ways and trying to secure the buildings. Survivors here in Amatrice will spend the night in giant tents pitched a few blocks away. They'll of course get access to that £40 million of emergency aid. But that's just the beginning. In the long term, Italy really has a decision to make. Is this country prepared to spend the billions and billions of pounds needed in order to renovate and restore all buildings in this earthquake-prone region to make sure that what happened here, a mass collapse of buildings, never happens again?
James, thank you. James Reynolds there in Amatrice. The US Secretary of State, John Kerry, says he's had long, productive and constructive talks with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, in Geneva. The discussions are aimed at restarting peace negotiations over the war in Syria. Today, government and rebel troops agreed a deal on the evacuation of civilians from the besieged suburb of Daraya on the outskirts of Damascus, ending one of the longest standoffs of the war. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet's report contains some distressing images.
Leaving Daraya, these children have known little else but war. For 4 years, this rebel-held town was bombed, blockaded and broken. For the opposition, Daraya was a symbol of defiance, now a scene of surrender. And for President Assad's army, celebration. No one but Bashar, they cry. The soldier says rebel fighters knew their fate, to surrender or die. He accuses the opposition of holding people hostage here. As families leave, the fighters still stay, uncertain they can leave safely. Far from Daraya in Geneva today, a push to reach a very different kind of deal to end Syria's war. The US's John Kerry is here to meet Russia's foreign minister again to see if their diplomacy can stop the fighting. What's the main obstacle to a truce, a journalist shouts. Mr. Lavrov quips, "I don't want to ruin the atmosphere." But the mood is already grim.
Thank you very much.
The foreign ministers have now spent the entire day inside this hotel. We're told they're trying to close the last gaps in a deal to strengthen their military cooperation against so-called Islamic State in Syria, and also to pressure their Syrian allies to accept a truce. But even if they do make progress here, it's unlikely to be enough to end a devastating war. More than 5 years on, Syria is shattered. Even now, fighting still intensifies in divided cities like Aleppo. And so does the pain. These two boys just lost their brother. He was killed by a bomb. They still have each other. It's not enough. And what will be enough to end Syria's punishing war? Sergei Lavrov and John Kerry emerged after 12 hours of talks here in Geneva, said they didn't have a deal that they wanted and that Syria desperately needs. But both foreign ministers talked about narrowing their difference. Sergei Lavrov talked about just a few dots dividing them. And John Kerry emphasized that they now had clarity, more clarity on how to reach that elusive truce. But no sign yet here or indeed on the ground in Syria when that truce will ever happen.
Lise, thank you. Lise Doucette there in Geneva. Now, West Midlands police have arrested 5 people on suspicion of terrorism offences. 3 were detained in Birmingham, the other 2 in Stoke-on-Trent. After one of the arrests, an army bomb disposal team was sent to the Lee Bank area of Birmingham as a precaution. All 5 men are now being questioned by counter-terror detectives. Let's speak now to our correspondent Phil Mackey, who's in Birmingham. Phil, just fill us in on the latest.
Yes, Clive, that army bomb disposal unit has just gone in the last couple of minutes. It's been here for the past 7 hours. And although this particular street looks like a rather derelict industrial estate, we're very close to the city centre here. And lots of people were in bars, restaurants, hotels nearby. We're told to stay inside earlier on today. Most of the attention has been focused on that little business unit next to where the police van is parked at the moment. We've seen officers in their forensic overalls coming and going all afternoon. Those 5 men were arrested on the suspicion of the commission, preparation or instigation of acts of terrorism. The first time anybody has been arrested on such a serious offence in this city for several years. As I mentioned earlier on, there was a much wider cordon in this part of town, but the bars, restaurants and hotels have been open as normal and people have been coming as going. Those men, Clive, incidentally, are being detained in the West Midlands. The police have 48 hours before they have to apply for an extension to their custody time limit.
OK, Phil, thanks for that. Phil Mackey there in Birmingham. Lifeguards will be deployed this bank holiday weekend at the beach in East Sussex, where 5 men from London died on Wednesday. Council officials hope the temporary service at Camber Sands will reassure the public. Relatives say those who died may have survived if the beach was manned. NHS services across England could be cut as part of wide-ranging efficiency plans seen by the BBC. The proposals include ward closures, cuts to bed numbers and changes to accident and emergency departments. NHS England needs to save £22 billion by the end of 2020. It says local people will be consulted on the plans. Our health editor Hugh Pym reports.
It's a process which could result in a radical shake-up of health and social care services in some areas of England, with possible closures of A&E units, hospital buildings and a review of GP services. Here in Leeds, plans have been drawn up for the possible closure of some wards across several hospital sites in the city. In nearby Huddersfield, the local A&E is already earmarked for closure.
The view is that care will suffer.
Campaigners who've been fighting that decision are concerned by the latest news of a wider local reorganisation.
Everything seems to be done piecemeal, and there doesn't seem to be an overarching plan that puts patients and the public at the centre. I think there needs to be a huge debate about the NHS.
More detail has emerged of local health plans being drawn up in other areas. In Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, there are proposals to reduce 3 general hospitals to 2. In the Black Country area of the West Midlands, there's a plan to close an A&E unit. In Cornwall, there's a proposal to move resources from hospital care into the community.
Local health and council leaders have been told by NHS England to come up with their own plans for working more closely together to make the best use of resources. The background to that is the need to find billions of pounds of efficiency savings over the next few years. The problem is, while the government has given the NHS more money, it hasn't kept up with increasing demand for patient care.
NHS leaders say it's not about cuts for the sake of it, but how to meet the needs of a growing and ageing population.
With that demand comes rising costs, and we're not trying to say, well, the simple answer is to just slash and burn and close services, but in fact we need to think about how we deliver services and what tends to drive up those costs.
I think Cordian just 30.
The plans haven't been finalised. Public consultation will start in the autumn. Health chiefs say it's a big moment for the NHS as it tries to tackle the long-term financial and care challenges. But selling that message won't be easy as local campaign groups protest against closures. Stand by for what could be a bruising and heated debate. Hugh Pym, BBC News, Leeds.
There's been an unprecedented rise in the murder rate in the Philippines after the country's new president won power, promising tough action in the war on drugs. But Rodrigo Duterte's critics say his hardline tactics include turning a blind eye to extrajudicial killings. One campaign promise included a pledge to kill 100,000 criminals in his first 6 months in office. Well, nearly 2,000 people have died in the 7 weeks since the crackdown began, with more than 750 killed in police operations. The chief of police says nearly 700,000 drug users and dealers have turned themselves in so far. Our correspondent Jonathan Head has been on one police raid in Manila and he sent us this special report.
The war on drugs is reaching all corners of the Philippines. Even here in the jails. Many of these men are already serving long sentences for drug use. In cells so packed with bodies, it's hard to breathe.
It says something about the extent of the drug problem here in the Philippines, that the police have had to come here and raid one of the biggest prisons around Manila. There are clearly concerns about real drug problems here, but the focus at the moment, as with so much of this campaign, is people at the very bottom of the trade, not the people running it.
At least here they can stay alive. But not here. The bodies of dealers and addicts are discovered every night in the slums of Manila, killed either by the police or by shadowy hit squads. It started when this man, Rodrigo Duterte, an outspoken crime-fighting mayor, was elected president in May.
Either you kill me or I will kill you.
When he said he would kill drug dealers, he meant it.
Does the lives of 10 criminals really matter to me? If I am the one facing the grief, would 100 lives of this idiot would mean anything to me?
The president is still wildly popular for this kind of talk. Drug addiction has blighted neighbourhoods already burdened by poverty. But his campaign has forced Roger, not his real name, into hiding. He's been a minor drug dealer for years. Now he's on the run.
I've done some awful things, I know. I've wronged a lot of people because they've become addicted to drugs, because I'm one of the many who sells them drugs. Not everyone who uses drugs commits crimes. Me, I'm an addict, but I don't kill.
This chilling security camera video shows why those targeted by the anti-drug campaign have so much to fear. A motorbike slows down for a moment, the passenger firing at point-blank range. It might easily have been Maria, a young mother and a hired assassin. She says she's killed 5 people since President Duterte won the election. Like Roger, she says it was poverty that drove her into the job.
I tell my husband that we can't keep doing this forever. We have children. I would not want our children to know what we do. I do not want them to come back at us and say that they got to live because we killed for money.
Nearly 700,000 terrified drug addicts have already surrendered to the Philippines police to save their lives. They must somehow now be accommodated in these teeming, overcrowded cells. Jonathan Head, BBC News, Manila.
An optometrist who failed to spot an eye condition during the routine test of a young boy who later died has been given a 2-year suspended prison sentence. Honey Rose failed to notice that Vincent Barker had swollen optic discs when she examined him at a branch of Boots in Ipswich in 2012. The abnormality is a symptom of fluid on the brain. Vincent, who was 8, died 5 months later. France's highest court has suspended a ban on full-body swimsuits or burkinis worn by Muslim women, while the ruling only applies to one town, that of Villeneuve-Loubet. It's likely other resorts, including Cannes and Nice, may have to lift the restriction as well. Campaigners say the ban on burkinis infringes the right of women to wear what they like. Hugh Schofield has been gauging reaction to the lifting of the ban in Villeneuve-Loubet.
C'est vrai? Oui, oui. Oh, les filles, le burkini, il a été enlevé ce matin par l'OUDA. Vive la France, vive la liberté!
This is Sarah Gadder and her family, and the moment when we told them that the burkini ban had been lifted. Sarah's Muslim, originally from Tunisia, and she told me that had it not been for the ban, she'd have been wearing a burkini or something like it on the beach today. Now that the news has come from Paris, she'll be back covering herself more fully tomorrow.
It's been really hard because we all felt we were being judged. Even though I've been covered for 30 years, it's never been a problem. But in the last 2 weeks I felt awkward. It's the way people were looking at me. Before, people didn't show how they felt towards us. Now they say they don't like it, and that really hurts.
In nearby Nice, it was pictures this week of a Muslim woman apparently being told by police to remove part of her clothing that caused outrage around the world. Towns along the coast had said that after the Nice lorry attack, there was a risk to public order from outward signs of Muslim affiliation on public beaches. But now the court in Paris has overruled that, at least here in Villeneuve-Loubet, where there'll be no more fines now for wearing too much.
Of course, not everyone in France is going to agree with the court's decision. Former President Nicolas Sarkozy says he wants a bikini ban across the whole of the country, and polls suggest that a majority of the French would probably agree. They want to stop to what they see as the gradual encroachment of Islamic lifestyle and symbols into the public sphere.
A short distance away, a French family, the Spigolis, were this evening enjoying a traditional dinner on the beach. They all supported the bikini ban because they feel the state needs to push back to defend the French way of life.
It's the values that I've known, the region, the colours, the smells and environment, which are very special. If all that changes, it'll feel like it's no longer home. The sense of belonging to a region, a town, a state, a country is crumbling away completely. That's what's so troubling.
Today's court decision should act as a precedent, but this evening several mayors are saying they plan to keep the ban in their towns in place. Hugh Schofield, BBC News at Villeneuve-Loubet.
Video gaming is a multi-million-pound global industry, and its marketing potential is now attracting conventional sports like football, so much so that a 24-year-old from Somerset, Sean Allen, who's achieved huge success playing FIFA 16 on a console, has been snapped up by West Ham United to represent the team on virtual pitches. Our technology correspondent Rory Kethlin-Jones has more on the Hammers' newest signing.
At West Ham's training ground, they're preparing for the big match against Manchester City on Sunday. But one new signing is watching from the sidelines, because his skills lie in a virtual version of football, rather than the real thing. Sean Allen, whose game name is Dragon, plays the video game FIFA. The 24-year-old lives in Somerset. Signed in May by West Ham, he was the runner-up in this year's FIFA Interactive World Cup.
I'm just always trying to keep the high pressure.
The first esports player signed by a Premier League club is now expected to represent West Ham every time he plays in a FIFA tournament. But his training takes place in front of a games console.
What would you say to people who thought, this isn't a proper job, get a proper job?
Obviously people are going to always think that I'm just going to be sitting indoors just playing video games, not doing anything with my life, but I've proved the amount of money I've made this year, especially from FIFA, I've proved most people will earn less than what I've earned in a year just from working, and I've been sitting there doing video games.
West Ham, who've just moved into the Olympic Stadium, believe that esports will one day be big business for the club.
Football is, of course, a vastly lucrative sport with all sorts of revenue-earning opportunities, while esports is still in its commercial infancy. But one day, could a vast stadium like this be filled with an audience who've turned up just to watch a video game?
In fact, in South Korea, that's already happening. This stadium was packed out for the final of League of Legends, a much more popular game than FIFA. And football isn't the only sport trying to connect with video games fans. The car maker Nissan has been running the PlayStation Academy, taking the best online games players to race for real. West Ham won't say, but you can bet Sean Allen is paid a tiny fraction of what midfielder Cheku Kouyaté earns. Mind you, in this game of FIFA, Sean won 5-0. Rory Cutton-Jones, BBC News.
That's it. Now on BBC One, it's time for all the news where you are. Have a very good night.